So Optimal Risk is a boutique risk advisory service. We do have multiple high net worth individuals within our client base, but I'm not going to talk about any of them today. I'm sure you would expect me not to talk about any of them today. But I'm going to talk about one of our clients who's, I think, is wealthy because he's got more money than me, but he's not necessarily up there with some of your clients. So we do close protection, we do vulnerability assessments, we look at people's properties, and we ultimately try to reduce risk for them so they can live, work, rest and play in the countryside, in their safe castles, in their safe havens. And that's what we do every single day. So I want to share with you how we would do that, or how we do that. So I'm going to give you two jewels to put into the Insafe. And I'm slightly conscious that I'm talking to, I hope, a room full of risk managers, because that's what you are. You manage risk, you leverage risk. But I want to talk to you about adversarial risk in particularly. So these are the bad guys that evolve their attack methodology to circumvent anything that you and I, or we all, try to achieve. And then on the right-hand side, I want to talk about a security management review process that we advocate, that we use. I'm going to do that through a storytelling. So, slight difference between flooding on the farm that we mentioned earlier. This adversarial risk also involves intention and capability of bad people. And we need to determine their attack methodology and their strengths. How do they actually deliver their illicit business model? And Philip will talk about this as well later on, because we work off the same model. But from that, we will come into the risk management side, and obviously we're talking about the probability, the likelihood, and the consequence, and you help lobby or leverage the consequence. But in the middle there, we look at the vulnerability of our defences. So if our defences are reasonably weak or there's gaps, then that provides and increases that likelihood of an attack being successful. So we've got the bad guy, we've got gaps in our defence, the probability is going to be much higher. And then obviously we get to the event that occurs, and then we're talking about how do we mitigate the consequence. So let me introduce you to Charles. Charles is a farmer in Cambridgeshire. He's married to Jo. They run a business. They run quite a large business. And their workforce is their family. Not too dissimilar, eh? Not too dissimilar. I'm going to use a farming environment, but in your mind, think about your clients. Think about how they live. Think about what they have in and around the space that they call home, that safe place that they want to enjoy their life with. So this isn't a typical farmer, or is it a typical farmer nowadays? He does much more than produce food or to put onto our tables. He actually produces power for the local village. He has his own factory on site. His chickens, his hens, produce eggs that go directly to the supermarkets that you and I eat every day. They then use the waste product from their chickens as fertiliser, as organic additives to the soil of their neighbouring farmers. So they can completely, using a full circle approach to farming, to tick sustainability objectives, to obviously tick their financial objectives, and they're green. They don't use any fertiliser at all on their farm or with their animals. No additives with their animals. So he's a fourth generation farmer. He's only 50. His dad still lives on site. His background is private school. He's an educated man. He understands how to run his business. But I would argue that he's complacent to the adversarial risk, and I'd argue that he's naive, maybe ignorant even, as to the consequences of what might occur to his business plan. He's got a relatively modest turnover. He's linked to a larger turnover in a similar sort of farm in Thirsk, in Yorkshire. So he makes a good living. His land is reasonably small. It's too small of a farmer to make the growth or the cereals that he can grow or the product that he can grow in his fields to sell. But but he makes enough to feed another product on his farm. So for us, as the adversarial risk managers, we need to understand the business on the left-hand side, we need to understand the people on the right-hand side, and we also need to understand the ground. How vulnerable are they geographically? How can somebody get in there and get out without being caught? So we need to assess, or we need to look at the characteristics of what it is we are trying to protect. So what are we trying to protect? We're trying to protect the family home, right? This is that safe place, right? The kids are going to be doing their homework. They want to come home from school and be safe. They don't want to be confronted by anybody else in the house. So that's the first thing. So the home and the family, most critical. I think people would be quite forward in their approach to try and protect these two things, their family. And most people will be a have-a-go hero if somebody in their family is likely to be injured or killed from an adversary, from a trespasser in their home. Just think about that. Somebody's in your home. We all deal with burglary, but we've got to think about it. Somebody's been in your home, your safe place. So what else have we got to look at then in this business plan? We've got to look after his 28,000 hens. 28,000 hens. None of which is in a battery farm. They're all free range. They're all walking and running around the paddocks and the woods on his farm. That produced the 25,000 eggs a day that he sends to our supermarkets. And he facilitates that through his own on-site packing factory, the quality of which he has to assess of the product that he releases. He also got a power station. So the stuff that he does grow in the fields, he stacks up. As soon as it starts to ferment or go off, he starts loading it into this, using his equipment, loading it into this bucket here that then ferments, produces gas, and that gas itself generates and then produces power. He calls this his mechanical cow. This is the control room that operates that. So that green shed there, that's inside that green shed. Doors left open. He's the only person who knows how to operate that power factory. And it generates everything for his farm and also 240 houses in the local village. So he's a net producer. He also has got a local builder that works, that he allows to use his farmyard to store all of this building equipment, all of his building machinery, his vans, and he's obviously got his own stuff, his own kit. So 680,000 harvester, you know, might have he's got two Manitous, this one, an old one and a new one. But all that's stored on his farm. So if we understand what we're trying to protect, we've got a better chance of mitigating these guys here, the bad guys. So these are the people, these are organised crime gangs. These aren't opportunists. They travel the country, they'll travel 350 miles just to have a look at an opportunity of stealing something. And then they'll go back another day with all of the right equipment to steal it. And this is the sort of kit they're using. So if we understand the methodology, the mindset, the motivation, the capability of the adversary, the organised crime gangs, the true outlaws of our community, they're not fussed about the police. And they also know the police are not going to turn up. So they are forensic aware. They have got the benefit of these reasonably high-powered, battery-powered handheld tools. They can pretty much mitigate most things. So when we design our Insafe safes, we design it to a certain criteria to get a certification to be able to sell it with that resilience, that level of protection. That's what we do with our plan. We understand how they attack, we understand what tools they attack, and then we advise on giving the farmer or the high net worth individual the right level of resilience that they need to get to. And I'll talk about that later on. So in this guy, in this farm, Charlie's slightly worried about the protesters. He's slightly worried about the activists, the saboteurs, because one infected virus could take out his business because it would just wipe out his chickens or hens. And the same with anybody that's got a challenge with his power station. If somebody gets in there and just wants to be a little bit mischievous, and they sabotage it or they criminally damage it, then he's taken offline. So you'll notice here that you could get irresponsible dog walkers or disenfranchised children or misguided young adults. So it's not just the organised crime gangs, it's anybody that might just wander onto the farm or into the estate. So what do we know what they do, we work out what they do, and that's the sort of crime pattern on the left-hand side. But actually it all stems from trespass, a civil offence. So if somebody comes onto your land and then commits a secondary crime, then that's the secondary crime is the criminal element. But actually coming onto your land is trespass, is not a criminal offence. So this is the sort of things that we've got to try and mitigate. So we've done we know what we're trying to protect, we know who the bad guys are and what their attack methodology is. So now we start using that knowledge to go and assess what we're trying to protect. So we walk the ground with the knowledge in our head and we start looking for gaps in the existing defences. So those gaps we call vulnerabilities, so we're now doing a vulnerability assessment. And the first thing on Charles's farm, unfortunately for him, is there's a public footpath. So that gives the members of the public, aka organised crime gangs, a legitimate reason or right to be on his property. That's a real challenge for us. So what we do is we walk that public footpath and say, well, what can we see whilst we're on the path? I've now put myself into the head of a criminal, of the organised crime gang member, and I'm looking at it through a set of criminal goggles. And I'm thinking, what can I see? How vulnerable are they? What can I do with my tool set to get what I want? On the power station, no fencing, nothing at all. Anybody could walk across the field and just walk into his operational technology control room because he doesn't believe that somebody will do that, because he hasn't got the mindset of a criminal. The livestock, it's free roaming. The fence is designed to keep the birds in, not to keep people out. That's reasonably normal, isn't it? That's pretty much what they all do. But as long as they know that that's a vulnerability, they can't claim it as a part of their defensive plan or of their security mitigation. The factory itself, again, you know, he did actually lock it, the door that I went through. But then when we got there and the big shutter door at the back was gone, he was chuntering under his breath about John had taken out the monitor and not dropped the automatic door again. So the behaviours of his staff, of actually one of his sons, wasn't what he expected. So behaviours of the team is also something we look at. So it's quite a diverse setup. And again, I'm looking at a farm here, but you could just take away the farm environment, put in your high net worth family environment, and what do they do in and around on their land. Everything I've shown you today is not discretionary information. I haven't recorded that whilst I was on his farm. I've taken it off the website. And I've only shown you probably 10% of what we would analyse if we were trying to determine the vulnerabilities of that particular family and or their property. So you have to be careful. And that's something that we do at Optimal Risk. We have our cyber security specialists that look at the digital footprint of the people that we're trying to protect. We have recently had a chap, one of the chief officers in an organisation, he said, that's okay, you won't find anything about me on the net. You won't, genuinely you won't. 87 pages the report was. 87 pages, and he was absolutely gobsmacked. And guess where it all came from? Most of it came from the kids. Dad's doing this, Dad's doing this. You know, we're going on holiday. so it's not just the person at risk or the high profile person, it's that entourage as well. It's the people that work and live with them, including the family members. So what do you reckon the single point of failure in Charles's business plan is? I've explained to you some vulnerabilities. What's a single point of failure? Charles. He's the only person that knows how to operate the power station. He's the only person that does the quality assurance of the product that goes out of the door, the eggs. So if Charles is also the response to something he sees on his cell phone, because the video cameras go through to his cell phone, and Charles gets out there in his boxer shorts and his wellies, he's putting himself in harm's way. He's actually putting the business at risk. But they all do it. They all do it. And as long as Charles leaves his shotgun alone in the safe, that's okay. But don't take the shotgun out, because he will be the victim. Because they will take it off him and they will use it against him if they haven't taken their own weapons with them. So it is a challenge. So what do we have to do then? We have to balance all of that information that we've just found out, and this is where we start doing our adversarial risk assessment. So we start putting, scores, numbers, whatever you want to do, to risk statements, qualified risk statements, and then started working out what's the high risk, what's the lower risk. Because nobody has an infinite amount of cash, and nobody neither wants to live in a fortress. They want to be protected, they want to feel safe, the psychological feeling of being safe without big fences and loads and loads of security guards walking around. So we have to describe it, we have to work that out. So, and we're looking at, if you remember, the attractiveness of that location for the adversary. We're looking at the motivation. Are they they could do it, but they're not interested. Or they are interested, but they actually can't do it. They haven't got the capability or the strength or the guts to go and do it. They wish they could, but they couldn't. But if you can get somebody that can do it and is motivated to do it, they're the dangerous ones. So we've got to work that out. And we do that by, we start looking at the risk mitigation through putting in multiple layers of protection, multiple layers of defence. And because I predominantly work within the rural crime communities, I use a model called the cheese and onion flavoured model. The Swiss cheese model of industrial safety, layers of defence that will stop the hazard getting to the person. And then putting on the onion skin, the multiple layers of an onion. If you're a farmer, if you've ever had rotten onions, if you peel off the outer layers, the centre of the onion is still, usable. You can still eat it because the outer layers protect it. And it's only when the rot gets right into the middle that you actually throw it away. So that's the onion skin. So what does that look like? What does that look like in the actual defences? Quite, you're not spent, there's no tests at the end of this. But this is the level of detail that we go into, right? We look at, the outer layer would be legislation, the inner layer would be the safe. That's where the jewels are, in the safe, right? So there's multiple layers, it goes all the way out. And every layer is either going to deter the criminal from having a go, detect at the earliest stage, delay, so it gives us time to put our response plan in place, and then we respond. So everything that we advocate either deters, detects, delays, or triggers or enables time for us to respond appropriately. And the response might be, get in the safe room, get the security team with us, ring the cops. So those lithium batteries we're talking about, they are actually your reserve power now. So if you've got high net worth individuals that haven't got the ability to maintain their own power, you haven't got a resilient place to live, or you haven't got a safe room. If you haven't got satellite communications, you are not appropriately equipped. You've got to be able to have independent power outside of the grid, and you've got to have the independent communications. So it's got to be affordable, proportionate, and acceptable to those that you are, if it gets in the way of them delivering their business plan or enjoying their life, you're just wasting your time. It's got to be acceptable. That's why we need to know the people at the beginning. So what we do then is we have measured approach. We call them storyboards, but these things are facilitating conversations with the farmer. We'll use these. We'll sit down with the farmer and we'll just talk through their individual challenges and give them the advice that we would like to give them. All right, so this is particularly for protecting equipment and vehicles. This one is the actual pickup. We talked about some of the vans that you've got. I'd love to have a conversation later because I think they are vulnerable, especially if they're parked overnight in a local hotel where they're being attacked all of the time. Because they'll cut the side off the van and just take all the tools out. So we use these, again, no testing here. Or we talk about developing a security culture within the workers or within the family. So again, another cognitive process that's been well researched, well tested, and we sit with them and we work through them. And this is about, let's not use the internet, kids. Let's not tell everybody that dad's going here next week or mum's going there tomorrow. Don't allow people advance notice because they will use that information and they are fishing for it all the time. So this is about rural families, but if a slight tweak, I can do that to create a protective entourage around a person at risk. And this is what our CPOs, our close protection officers, do, is getting everybody that oscillates around that person at risk to behave securely so they themselves don't cause risk or vulnerabilities in the person's at risk's protective envelope. And these are the things that we use every single day, and they are absolutely proven to work. But the last part of this, and I'm already on my 30 minutes, it's like everything else. Things change, right? So as soon as we get a defence in place, somebody will be able to get around the back door. There'll be a circumventing it because they study as well. They study their craft as well. So as soon as we get a defence in place, they'll work around it. So we need to review regularly. We go in there annually, I would say, is the normal. But actually, there's five reasons why we would knock on the door or send the email or phone them and say, I think we need to come and have a look again because we know about X now and we know that you're vulnerable to that. People can make a decision. They can make a choice. But we know that every now and again we need to go around that cycle to make sure that what we recommended last year is still relevant for this year. That's really it. That's simple, isn't it? So, you don't really need us to come and help you, but if you do, you can get hold of us here. And there's so much more that, you can't fit in a 30-minute conversation. But using Charles as the model, I think, is vulnerable. Because he's allowed us to brief on this, we will actually go and do a free vulnerability assessment for him and help him get the right and proportionate levels of protection for him and his family. Now I've actually gone and looked at it, and he's given me kind permission to use that today. I can't leave him hanging out there. He's what keeps you up at night. He doesn't, Charlie doesn't, but it's that sort of thing that might. So that's it. Thank you very much.